Welcome to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, your number one source for jazz. We're the choice, KTSU, your community station, 90.9 on the FM dial, and we are also on the World Wide Web, ktsusradio.com. Man, what a great joy it is to greet you on this Resurrection Sunday. This is the Sunday for Christians that is the highlight of the Christian calendar. We know the birth of our Lord in the Advent season was critical and important to our faith, but the resurrection is that place where the work on the cross was accepted, reconciliation was made available for those of us who are of the Christian faith. And for those of you who are not, man, I hope you're having a great day as well. I'm excited today to have a person who has been a friend. We've been able to work together along with his staff on several projects regarding the community. And there are some things going on. There were some things going on before COVID-19. There are some things that are going on now in the midst of COVID-19. And we're going to hear from our police chief here in Houston, Chief Art Acevedo, in just a moment. Just a couple of housekeeping matters. If you want to follow me during the week, you can follow me on Twitter at DZ Cofield. You can also follow me on Instagram at DZ Cofield, and you can follow me on Facebook at DZ Cofield. Matter of fact, you can follow me on any platform at DZ Cofield. It's just like that. And for those of you who are watching, I want you to know we're practicing social distancing, as you can probably tell, and we are using the Zoom platform to do our show on today. And I want to thank all of my technical people for helping me navigate this and get us to this place as well. For the last 3 years plus, Art Acevedo has served as the police chief for the city of Houston. Before that, 9 years as the police chief of the city of Austin here in Texas. And before that, he started off, some of you remember that old police show Chips. He started off his career with California Highway Patrol in 1986. He has been in law enforcement for the last 34 years. One of the things that I love about Chief Art Acevedo is he is passionate. He is not afraid to share his feelings or his emotions. Just recently, he held a press conference and made some statements. And I was watching Mayor Turner's press conference later on, and one of the reporters said, what do you think about the chief's statements? Do you agree with the chief's statements? And the mayor was kind of like, you know, I mean, you can almost see the look on his face like, I don't know what the chief said, but I got the chief's back. And I think one of the things we all know is that whether you agree with Chief Art Acevedo or not, you know he's coming from his heart. He's coming from a place of commitment and love for this community. And so let me take this opportunity to welcome to Real World, Real Talk, Chief Art Acevedo. There we go. Gotta give you applause, man.
Oh, Lord. The Holy Spirit this Easter Sunday has us moving. He's moving.
Chief, man, thank you for being with us. I really appreciate you. You know part of my family story. My dad was on the job in New York City. He worked transit. He worked patrol beat. He worked undercover narcotics. My dad has passed away now. I really wish I could have some conversations now with him being grown, but he was always my hero growing up, man. I always wanted to be a police officer just because my dad did it, and it was the coolest thing. You know, the respect that at that time law enforcement officers had, and, you know, his positive influence. You know, he was one of those people just professionally that was salt and light because he just made a difference when he showed up, you know, when people saw him in the room. And so I always have a great place in my heart for law enforcement officers. First, Chief, how are you doing? How's the Houston Police Department doing in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, happy Easter, Pastor. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be here, but we're doing well. You know, we're an apartment that's very reflective of this melting pot we call the city of Houston. And quite frankly, this is a city a police department, a community that comes together when times get hard. And like we demonstrated in Harvey and throughout all the different natural disasters we've had, this is nature that we're fighting again with COVID-19. When the tough gets going, Houstonians come together, and it's something we should all take great pride in and joy in. And so we have one officer that is in critical condition still on a ventilator, and we ask for prayers, continued prayers from the community. We know that God answers our prayers. Sometimes we don't understand it, but we know that he's perfect and his plan is always perfect. And so he has shown some slight improvement. But we've had close to 32 officers that have come back positive now. But thank God, most of them are doing really, really well, with the exception of one that's struggling right now.
So, Chief, let me ask you, when you look at what's going on in New York in particular, and you hear the stories, man, 20% of the force, calling out, suffering with COVID-19. One, how do you feel when you hear that for your brothers and sisters in blue? And then secondly, what strategies are you all putting in place so you don't have that happen to you here in Houston?
I've been talking to my colleagues across the nation. I'm the president of the Major City Chiefs Association, which is the 69 largest police departments in the United States and the 9 largest in Canada. And so we communicate on a regular basis. We have a conference call once a week, and Shea McDermott, Dermot Shea, who's the commissioner of the NYPD, a great guy. He's lost over a dozen of his NYPD brothers and sisters, and your heart goes out to them. But there's been 38 police officers so far that have succumbed to COVID-19 nationwide. So it's important for us to talk about that, because some people want to believe that this isn't a real threat, that this is just a common flu. And this is what this is a very contagious, very debilitating pneumonia. And so when you see what's going on in New York, I'm happy to say that we immediately started taking steps to mitigate the threat to our police officers and to the community. And I think as a result, we started off, for example, Mayor Turner announced that he wanted people to follow the CDC guidelines, and we actually made people quarantine that were coming back from travel. And so we had over 200 police officers quarantined at one time, and now we're down to well under 100. And so it's worked. We've given them the gloves, the mask, the eyewear, and I think the strategies that we have employed has helped keep our exposure to a minimal levels compared to other agencies.
We had the mayor on last week, and I commended the mayor. I think he's done a tremendous job of providing very calm, very deliberate leadership in the midst of this pandemic and in the midst of this crisis. Just a great job. And I think one of the seminal moments in terms of this city's dealing with the pandemic, and I think history is going to show the distinction between how Mayor Turner dealt with a very public event and how the mayor of New Orleans, and I'm not trying to throw shade on the mayor of New Orleans, but when they went through with Mardi Gras, they set some things in motion that I think we're going to be dealing with for months, if not years. When the mayor made the decision to pull the plug on the rodeo and to say, no, we're not going to go forward. We got one person who tested positive. And I remember people saying, man, it's just one person. Like, what is the big deal? But he made that decision, and I commended him for making the decision based upon public health concerns and not the economy. What was your reaction when you heard that he had made that decision and the reason behind that decision? Because I know you're part of that executive leadership. What was your thought when he made that decision?
I said, hallelujah, thank God, because we know that tent where that first exposure occurred, which was community exposure, more people came back positive, not just one officer that actually went into critical condition for a while. Thank God he's recovered. But it just shows you that we have a mayor that's willing to make the tough decisions. And I think that, as a person of faith, we rely on our faith. I think God talks to us on a regular basis, and he's always signaling us on what he wants us to do. And when you're obedient, and I think he was obedient to that inner voice, that's, the Holy Spirit telling you to do something on behalf of the Lord. And he made that decision. I really believe that helped save lives. And it sent a very powerful message. And, some people didn't think we did it early enough. But what they forget is that we had mixed messages at the national level. And so there's a lot of skepticism. And so, when you have the national government, the federal government sending mixed messages, it makes it even tougher for local leaders to make their decisions, because they're going to be, they're going to be hammered. I don't want to use the word crucified, because there's only one crucifixion that matters to me, but they're going to be hammered for doing something contrary to what's being put out by the federal government. So thank God for local leaders like Sylvester Turner and governors that had New York not acted quickly, had California not acted quickly and decisively, had Washington State not acted quickly and decisively at a time when others at the federal level were actually downplaying and actually being dismissive of the threat, we would be in a much worse place. So thank God for the mayor and his decision and to do it. And I'm really proud of the fact that when I went to the rodeo itself, those leaders understood what this was about, and they didn't fight the mayor on it. But I'll never forget when I went to First Responders Day, I was already social distancing and people were getting offended. It's like, why don't you want to shake hands? And I said, look, so I'd always say that's because I'm around a lot of people, and this virus that we're starting to deal with is very contagious. I don't want to get you sick. But people were offended. I think now they're starting to understand why this old police chief wasn't just crazy. He was just trying to keep people safe.
Yeah. I think you are absolutely right. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. D.D. Cofield, and you're listening to your member-supported public radio station, The Choice, 90.9 KTSU. We are your community station. I think it's interesting because people look at the results in terms of what the data is coming out of New York versus Houston versus Detroit versus New Orleans, and they're saying now in criticism, the governor of New York didn't act fast enough, the mayor of New York didn't act fast enough, but they're not looking at the contributing factors, me being a native New Yorker, the density issues, and again, to your point, the mixed messages on the federal level. You kind of left it up to everybody to do what was right in their own sight. And so, we commend, I don't know if the governor of New York wants to run for president, but, his press conferences are better, and he does a better job of articulating what's going on in the state than we have gotten on a federal level in terms of our federal leadership, regardless of what political party affiliation you have. What are some of the challenges that you're finding in policing during COVID-19? I know you have the social distancing aspects as well. And I heard the mayor kind of tongue in cheek, but I think he was serious, telling criminals, hey, you guys take a break for a minute, right? And just, you all shelter in place as well, right? You all stay home as well. But what are some of the challenges that you're facing in this COVID-19 pandemic period? Well,
the biggest challenges have been being able to get the equipment that we need to get our folks, keep them safe. And the biggest reason we were having that challenge is that our federal government just wasn't stepping up to the plate. And we've had to really scramble. The city with the mayor and Jerry Adams, the strategic procurement office director, have done a heck of a job of scouring the world, really, to get us the equipment that we need. The major city chiefs, international fire chiefs, governors, mayors, so everyone's been calling on the White House to actually utilize the Defense Production Act to ensure that we are putting the full capabilities of that American manufacturing might to produce and provide what we needed. And we lost weeks and weeks of being able to mass produce the masks that now we're telling everybody. I think the biggest challenge is, as a police department, I kept telling my team, we need to stop making decisions as a police department or our federal partners based on what's happening today or tomorrow. We need to look at the environment we're going to be facing 8 weeks from now, 10 weeks from now, and respond based on the environment that's coming, not what's before us now. Because I knew that there was going to be a matter of time before we're all going to have to wear masks. So the government, the federal government, should have been producing masks weeks and weeks ago. And then if you think about the advice that the CDC and the feds have been giving us, it's almost, I hate to be a conspiracy theorist, but it seems that it's almost been based on what they knew to be the availability of supplies, and then it's evolved as we've been able to ramp up production. But I think that has been the greatest challenge, is trying to get our federal partners, it's really responsible for that national response, to see what was ahead and not necessarily what's right in front of us.
Yeah. So you've seen some calls go down. You've seen some calls go up. I would imagine some burglaries, maybe going down. Businesses are closed, shut down. But I've heard domestic violence calls are going up, and I remember my dad telling me, the one call that you hate to hear as a police officer and respond to is a domestic violence. I mean, you just don't know what's going on and where people's heads are, et cetera. Is that true in Houston as well, in terms of you seeing a rise in domestic violence calls?
We have seen a significant rise in domestic violence calls, and it really is worrisome because, for all of the ones that we're seeing, we know that's just what the ones that are reported. So despite the fact that it goes unreported, we have seen a huge rise in domestic violence calls. And the Houston Area Women's Center has seen a huge rise in over 40-something%, close to 50% increase in their calls for help. Yeah, and the need for emergency sheltering and removal of women and families from an abusive situation. And then a related issue that you worry about are children that are being abused. They're not in school right now, and the school environment is where children have the outlet by which they can, there can be an outcry to a counselor, a teacher, or a fellow student, or where teachers that are trained on what to look for in children can actually, intervene. And so you worry about children that might be in abusive households and their ability. And so we've been trying to make sure that in English and Spanish, and that we're talking to children, we're talking to families, letting them know that the police department is 100% deployed. We are running on all 8 cylinders. Our partners are running on all 8 cylinders, and we are ready to help. Please go to a neighbor. When you go online, my son's back online. Thank God, he turned 12 today. He's back on at HISD. They're teaching online. To send a message to your teacher, but to reach out for help. So it's important that people know, especially communities of faith, that I think are probably a big part of our audience here today on Easter, is that Christ didn't die, and died for our sins, and we have not we've made it worth his while as human beings, and the enemy is alive and well and working double and triple time, and sadly, when we're facing something like COVID, people start making bad decisions. So it creates some space at home, go to another room, go outside, go on a walk, turn the other cheek, but don't turn to violence, because that's not going to help you get a job. That's not going to help you pay the bills. And if anything else, it's just going to make things worse for you and your family.
Yeah, I think you raised such a powerful point, because when we think of social distancing, we think about those outside of our homes, but we don't think about the emotional space that many people have created and function with, sometimes dysfunctionally, and whether it's good or bad, I could typically, I can blow off steam, I can go hang out with my buddies, I can, go play cards, play dominoes, whatever the case may be. As a woman, you go hang out with your girlfriends or whatever. All of those outlets now have been taken away, and so now you literally have to stay within close proximity. And I can imagine if you have a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment, not a whole lot of places you can go. And when you try to go, you're going to walk past the person. And so I think your advice is absolutely important and essential, that you take that walk, that you do what you need to do to clear your head, clear out your space, and really work on hopefully bettering that relationship and managing that relationship better. Chief, you've been in the news a little bit recently. You've taken the lead on some issues. You've been a very outspoken critic on various levels. And I'm really excited to have you on, because I think many times people make judgments based on sound bites. And I know, when you can have a press conference and, man, you can talk for a half hour and they'll take a snippet, and all of a sudden it becomes, wildfire, and it goes viral.
Right.
So I'd like to hear your perspective on what's going on with the criminal justice system and what your position is. You have people like the Reform Alliance who are saying, hey, we got to get people out of these prisons to the extent that we can, because you have people who are in jail because they're poor, not necessarily because of the merit of the charges. If we believe that tenet in the law, that all people are presumed innocent until proven guilty, then how do we balance that with people who may be a threat to society, even though it hasn't been proven in court? And I know and we've talked offline, and I know you don't want anybody in jail just because they're poor.
That's right.
But you also want to make sure that people are safe in the community. But now this health crisis is creating a pandemic tsunami in our criminal justice system and in jails, where social distancing is really a misnomer. It can't happen. And, you got men and women who are locked up who are sick. So if you can, help us make sense out of all of these moving pieces, because, it's almost like a multi-dimensional chess game, where pieces are moving up, down, and to the side and to the front. So let's talk about that in the order that you would like to talk about it, in terms of criminal justice reform, the county judge, sheriff, the district attorney. I know on some occasions, you and the district attorney have been on opposite sides of the table, and then on some, you all have been on the same side of the table. So talk about that a little bit, please, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. I'm glad you said that about the DA, because I think it's always important to work with one another, and it's important to engage one another. So when we have agreements, we agree. We have disagreements, we disagree without becoming disagreeable. But I think first and foremost, it's important for the community to know that police chiefs and law enforcement has really taken a lead in trying to deal with the historical disproportionality of the criminal justice system. We're the most visible cog in that wheel, but people forget police officers don't pass laws. Police officers don't interpret laws. Police officers don't hold anybody, render anybody guilty, send them to prison. All we do is enforce the laws that are passed by the people that are elected by the people that we should all be serving. But it's important for people to know that, so let's start the conversation with the fact that we support the proposition that people are presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. We support the fact that people, especially for non-violent offenders, should not be behind bars just because they can't afford to pay bail. So we've supported, and I support the misdemeanor bail reform that we entered into the agreement as a community last year, that has really reduced the jail population by thousands of folks from a height of over 10,500, a little over 7,000. So it's very difficult. It's very rare now compared to prior to misdemeanor bail reform to have misdemeanors behind bars. There are some carve-outs for repeat offenders and folks that just, no matter what, they just continue to reoffend, or some of the more violent misdemeanor charges, or some of the DWI stuff. But so we support that. But there are also people that believe because that no one should be held pre-conviction regardless of the crime. I just debated Alex, who's the primary lawyer in this litigation that now has moved to the felony bail piece, and that's where we have some disagreement. We agree in principle that just the inability to pay shouldn't be the sole reason somebody stays behind bars. It shouldn't be about money. It should be about risk, an assessment of risk. What is the risk to public safety posed by this individual that's been charged? What's the risk that this person is going to reoffend? Because you know that with recidivism, there's some people that, you know, we had somebody, and I'll talk about that in the next piece we're going to talk about. And what's the risk of flight? Those are the three things we should be assessing in a, you know, in a very strict, evidence-based approach and with some consistency. And so what's happened in our cities that we've taken the no bail for low misdemeanors, and the same people that believe that they took that on now want no one, regardless of the threat to public safety, threat of reoffending, or threat of flight, to be behind bars. And at the same token, I asked Alex when we debated on a podcast not too long ago, I said, you know, the same Constitution also guarantees a speedy trial. And when we have people that are charged with murder, waiting for a trial of 3, 4, 5 years, and I would argue it's by design, because those that want to believe that are maybe a little bit too progressive for me, it's almost by design. They want to muddy the waters. You know, think about from a restorative standpoint, who's going to hire somebody and give them a job when they're facing murder charges? You know, sure. And that just doesn't add up to me to what they're trying to accomplish. And justice delayed is justice denied. And so what I think we need to do is move towards again, what is the risk? What is the risk that the person poses? And so that's the other piece that's going on. And the third piece that's going on is the judge's order, where initially, you know, we're hearing proposals, and the word on the street was that they wanted to release anybody 55 and older. There are 16 murder suspects in that group waiting trial. There are you know, hundreds of folks that are 55 and older that are violent and that have a history of violence. So we kind of pushed back on that proposal, and we went down to what it should be. An assessment should be made based on case by case of the risk factors that we talked about, the 3 risk factors: risk to public safety, risk of reoffending, and the risk of flight. And it should be made by a judge, and it should be made case by case. Then the last piece of what's going on in our criminal justice system is that we have a handful of judges that I call them activist judges, because it's almost like, I don't know why they became judges, but I became a police officer out of a sense of patriotism the good Lord put in my heart early on. And, you know, a lot of people, I don't talk about it too often, but I have talked about it. You know, I was born in Cuba, and in the height of communism. And I'll never forget when I was about 10 years old, my big brother, who was about 16 at the time, my brother Nelson, who I love dearly, said, hey, you know, you're a failed abortion. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I'll never forget, he says, yeah, you know, dad tried to induce a miscarriage in mom when she was pregnant with you. I was born in July of 64, so I would say 63 sometime, late 63 and 64. And dad tried everything he could. He gave her shots. He did all kinds of crazy stuff. So I think he was teasing me. So I asked my parents. I said, hey, mom and dad, I said, what is this about? And my parents, to my surprise, said, your brother didn't make that up. That's true, son. And let's tell you what we didn't feel. We felt in our hearts, we wanted the good Lord to take you and deliver you to a family where there was hope. But there was no hope for us at the time, son. We were in communist Cuba. There wasn't enough food to go around. There was no freedom. And for us, it was an act of love, because we felt that God would put you in a better home. But you know what? God had plans for you, and it wasn't in his plans. And if you ever want to know, people want to know why, because you said earlier, Doc, that something that I always challenge people, you can question my decisions. I tell my cops that, because I'm pretty tough on bad policing. You can talk to the union about that. You can question my decisions. You can question my intellect, but I challenge people to question my heart. Because after that conversation, I'll never forget what went through my mind as a little boy. Said, God put you here for a reason. And I became a police officer in 1986 out of a sense of patriotism that this country gave us the greatest gift of all, freedom, and out of a sense of a deep desire to serve. And so that's what drives me. And so the reason I told you that story is that I want people to understand how I'm wired, right? Because people might think I'm crazy, and they might even think I'm crazier now. Who knows? But I think that, I don't worry about anything other than doing what I believe is the right thing. And I think that what's happening now, when we have some judges that are kicking cases left and right, saying there's no probable cause when there is, we have judges we have people, I believe in restorative justice. I mean, the good Lord on the cross forgave a thief, and I believe that people should be given a second chance, but I also believe that we should protect communities from evil. And, there are just some people that no matter how many chances they give them, they're just going to go right. They're not finding religion. They're finding another victim is what they're finding. And so when we have judges that now are giving $10 bonds to men that are beating on their wives, and we know that domestic violence, I've got a list here that I printed out of every child 16 and under in the last 3 years in this city that have been murdered. I can't tell you how many are domestic abuse or gang violence. And when we have judges that are putting people out because of their beliefs, that are then going out and committing more murders, murderers on low bond that go out and then murder somebody else, or murderer on low bond that go out and shoot a little boy in an apartment complex. And I know that Troy Finner, myself, Matt Slinkard, this is a new police department. Our chiefs are leading from the front. They don't wait to hear a report. We go to these scenes. We talk to these families. That's wrong. I just got a report yesterday. A guy that was in and out of court, never even would appear, bond after bond, personal bond after personal bond, gets released on personal bond again by a judge, and 3 days later he sexually assaults a woman. That may not be my family, but guess what? Those families, those children, they matter. And disproportionately, the majority of the people that are victims are people of color and poor people, including poor white people. And you know what? Every child in the city should be able to walk across the street to grandma's apartment or a friend's house, or play in the playground without having to worry about being shot, like a little boy that was just shot, 5 years old on April 1st. Jordan Allen Jr., 5 years old, life cut short by fools shooting in the parking lot. I'm going to fight for those people, those families. And until every child can walk on the street, we should all fight. And it's not a zero-sum proposition. People know common sense and good judgment when they see it. And I think most people in the city, when they see people that have a history of violent crime going in one door and out the other, they don't support that. And so I'm going to keep fighting for them, because that's just the way I'm wired.
Chief, I think you have, revealed what is a multi-layered problem. So, for example, there's a gentleman now, he is free. He was accused of a terroristic threat against a judge. There was no witnesses. There was no evidence. The only person that said that he did it actually benefited from him being locked up, because it was his roommate who lived in the guy's house for 1.5 years, 2 years while he was in jail waiting trial. And the person continued to make these allegations, but he had no proof, no evidence. And the DA kept on trying to get him to take a plea deal, and he refused. He was like, I didn't do it. I'm innocent. he eventually ended up staying in jail longer than the time he would have served if he had pled guilty. So you know the game.
Yep.
Hey, man, we'll give you time served and we'll let you out. And he was like, I'm not taking it because I didn't do it. His mother passed away while he was in jail. He couldn't go to the funeral. I mean, it's just crazy stuff. They ended up dropping the charges because I think, to your point, one of the problems with district attorneys is the game that they play with who can get the most notches on their belt. And it's, even though the district attorney is arguably the most powerful, person in this county and the chief law enforcement officer, and, you should be seeking the truth. The truth is many times they don't seek the truth, and you don't get those speedy trials. You get judges who are taking 6 months off to run for office and, a case at a time and things like that.
Well, you got it down, Pastor. You know exactly what's going on down there.
Yeah. I mean, we had a lawsuit that our church was involved in, and it was reset 14 times over a 4-year period. I mean, and that was just a civil lawsuit, so I can just imagine that, as a criminal attorney, when DAs are resetting and resetting and resetting. How do we really begin? Because I think you're right. That criminal justice reform has to be bigger than just releasing people.
Yeah.
But that's, if you don't give me a speedy trial, then that's just going to exasperate and turn into some other things. And the other piece that I thought was interesting, I was part of the juvenile justice initiative that was proposed by the Annie Casey and paid for by the Annie Casey Foundation. Harris County fought it for many years and then finally acquiesced as there were some changes in our leadership. And one of the things that was paramount to that process that I worked on, I was on the committee that developed the risk assessment instrument. And it basically revealed to us how subjective the decision making is regarding who we keep and who we release. And me, having worked in juvenile justice, I was, familiar with it. And as we went through this assessment, if the bias that was present in the questions that were asked, the interviewing process, we literally saw people who looked and were one race who committed more heinous offenses released, people who committed less offenses, they were held over. And that was just on the juvenile justice side. And all of the statistics of, when a child gets involved in the juvenile justice system, puts them on a path for having a lifetime relationship with the criminal justice system. What are some of the things now that, from your perspective, because you haven't been deemed the law enforcement czar of Harris County or the country, but what's the piece now that you are fighting most? You just had a press conference not long ago, and you had police chiefs and constables from all over. It was a powerful showing, I got to tell you. And as I was listening to the press conference, I was like, wow. I mean, when you see these kinds of men and women standing together, this is making a powerful statement. What was that about?
That was about bringing information to the community. I think that, Pastor, what you just talked about, that terroristic threat, that's not one. That's a guy talking smack if he did it. That's not somebody actually acting out. But that was about bringing transparency to the criminal justice system. Look, like I said at that press conference, the one cog of the criminal justice wheel that is the most visible and the most scrutinized is the police. Our officers make split-second decisions most of the time now, whether it's a body-worn camera or cell phone camera or a camera in a building. Our actions are caught on video of the vast majority of the times, and then they get scrutinized sometimes through litigation or grand juries for weeks, months, and years to come. But nobody knows what goes on with prosecutors. And then the ones that really have almost zero scrutiny are the judges. I mean, think about the Morton Act that happened here in Texas. When people talk about wrongful convictions, Most of the time, people think wrongful convictions, and they say the cops did something. When quite honestly, a good chunk of the time, it was the prosecutor that didn't provide the information, or it's the court that didn't do the right thing. And so what that was about is bringing light into what's happening in the criminal justice system. Look, we supported Kim. That same group of police officers, police leaders, stood with Kim Ogg in 2017 when she announced the marijuana diversion program. Those were the cops. That same group of leaders stood with Kim Ogg when we said we're going to start diverting, not even arresting, not even charging people with mental health issues for the lower level crimes to the Ed Emmett mental health intake. It's the same police leaders. And so what we're trying to do is ring the bell, sound the alarm to bring transparency to the court. And then I got a call from one of the constables after that press conference the next day who told me he got a call from 3 judges because I talked about we're going to start putting these cases, the police union is going to put together a website that's going to be promoted constantly to put these cases online so the public can determine for themselves what they think about what these judges are doing. And he told me, my God, I've gotten calls from 3 or 4 judges. They're really worried about this website. I said, well, they shouldn't be if they simply do the right thing, letting the law, common sense, and good judgment guide them. Look, people know righteousness when they see it. They know when somebody's being held that should be held, and they know when people that are being held that shouldn't be held. People have that intellect. So I say, let's bring some transparency. Judges know that. I remember I talked about one judge that was on Facebook complaining that how their people scrutinize their decisions. And my response to him is, wait a minute, you're an elected officer, you're an elected jurist, and you're in public service. And guess what? Public service demands that you be amenable to public scrutiny. Ultimately, we all work for the public, and we have to police with the consent of the people, and we have to have a criminal justice system that's supported by the people. And I think the more transparency we bring into a system, the more justice that we bring into the world, because when people know they're being watched and it's not happening in the dark, they're a lot more thoughtful when they know their decisions are going to be scrutinized.
Yeah, I think, Chief, the other problem is, and I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, and that's the activist judges. I think part of the challenge is, and I think you would agree with this, there's been so much injustice in the past that it's almost like this pendulum swing has swung back past, to your point, common sense, the center, and it's gone all the way over to say, okay, hey, man, you've been holding people like the gentleman who was held for 1.5 years, 2 years, longer than the sentence would be, and they kept on pressuring him. They had no evidence. They kept on resetting the case. I talked to his attorneys. They were like, hey, man, I just dropped it because the DA just wouldn't take it to court because they had no evidence. To now, look, we got to let everybody out. You know, if everybody's presumed innocent until proven guilty, and, you know, the old Ben Franklin adage, it's better for, you know, one guilty man to go free than 100 innocent men to be, you know, held, or vice versa, whatever the adage is. At the end of the day, there seems to be this overreaction, I think, by some to go to the opposite extreme. So how do we develop as much as possible, in your mind, an objective criminal justice system? Because, you know, when I hear, for example, officers and I hear judges discount implicit bias, you know, that they don't have a bias, and I'm like,
then you ain't human.
right. All of us have bias. What are you talking about?
That's exactly right.
And bias doesn't play a role in my decisions. Come on, no. I mean, you know, what do you think we need to do? For me, on the juvenile side, you know, the risk assessment instrument was a powerful tool because it created an objective tool. You score it based on points. It didn't leave room for you to say, oh, the person has braids or doesn't have braids, or this person has tattoos or doesn't have tattoos.
Yep.
None of that came into effect. You just looked at the charge, you looked at the seriousness of the charge. Is this a first offense, second offense, third offense? Flight risk. You looked at those
Yep.
things on an objective level. What do we need to do to create a better criminal justice system in your mind?
Well, first and foremost, we have to invest in it. When you don't have enough courtrooms and you don't have enough prosecutors, you don't have enough defense attorneys to get people resolution. I mean, who wants to have a criminal charge pending over their heads? If you're the suspect, charged suspect, or you're the family of the suspect, or you're the victim in the case, or the victim's family. Justice delayed, justice denied. But again, I think that's not by design by some with different motivating factors. Maybe prosecutors across the country, some who like to have fewer courts because then it puts pressure on people to plead out. And then don't get me wrong. There's some defense attorneys at the game they play is that they constantly reset,
Sure.
ask for reset. It's a game both sides play. But who's stuck in the middle? Families of the accused, families of the victims. We've got to invest in the criminal justice system. I think we have to bring transparency to the criminal justice system. We should have the decisions being made by the courts. Somehow the public can have easy access to the facts and so they can see what's going on. I think that's another very important piece. We need to have social scientists put together tools that are assessment tools that don't look at by the way, I think that when you look at those assessment tools, you don't need to know names. You don't need to know race. You don't need to know gender. You just need to know facts. Maybe give people their booking number, just a booking number. So it's truly a blind assessment. It's kind of like when we do double-blind witness lineups now, where the police officer that's giving that witness lineup doesn't have a clue who the suspect is. That way they don't do the old, hey, do you recognize, there's 6 pictures on this sheet here, Pastor, they're doing, do you recognize anybody here?
Right.
So now they can't do that. See, again, law enforcement is taking the lead in these issues. It's time for the criminal court system, the other cogs to catch up. And then the other thing that I think is really important is that we need to be just. Justice needs to start with the just in justice. We need to rethink some of the things that we're doing. I'll never forget. I shared this story. I showed it to John Whitmire, a dear friend in the Senate, and he's the dean and the chair. And he was on patrol with me New Year's Eve, my very first New Year's Eve here, December 31st, 2016. And when with this young officer, I usually patrol by myself because I want to see what's going on. My black and white, nobody knows who I am from a distance. If I wave in the neighborhood at somebody and somebody flips me the bird, that tells me we got some work to do here, right? But if they wave back, that's a good sign. And so this young officer makes a stop of a young African-American male, probably, my recollection was, early 30s. Think about it, Pastor. It's Christmas, New Year's Eve. He's wearing his work uniform. As he gets out of the car, what do you think this man chucks? A rock of a controlled substance, probably crap. Chucks it. We see him chuck it. Officer recovers it. Possession of that rock is a felony. So this officer's proud of himself. Hey, again, we don't pass the laws, right? We just enforce them. And on felonies, we have to book them. I go to inventory his car, open the door. It's New Year's Eve. It's probably about 9, 10 o'clock at night. I see a picture of a little boy, probably about 10 years old, his son. And I looked at John Whitmire and said, what have we accomplished in terms of public safety by taking this man away on New Year's Eve, impounding his car, taking him to jail, getting him a felony rap now, when clearly he's employed, has a family, but maybe has an addiction issue, but at least it appears to be manageable because he's working. Now we've taken this guy that maybe instead of taking that dope and giving him a summons to go appear in a drug court only to force him to get into treatment and then provide that treatment, an ongoing treatment, Those are the things that we need to really be focused on. Because what worries me, like you said, we went from one extreme to the right. Now we're going to another extreme to the left, these judges. And what they don't get, that extreme positions are just that, extreme. And most Americans are people of common sense, and life's about give and take. I'm worried, like you said, that they're going to go so far and to the left that all that work that's going into criminal justice reform, and there's a lot of legitimate work going on, is going to go, because what will happen is that feds are going to come right back. And this year, crime's already starting to go up significantly in a lot of cities for the first time in a long time. And so we have to be very thoughtful. But decriminalizing that, or making that more of a civil matter, getting that man treatment, not booking. Think about what could have potentially happened. Now he loses his job because he can't go back to work if he can't make bail because it's a felony. See, that's the felony that I don't want. I don't care about money. Just get him his summons. I don't even want him charged in the first place for a person that has an addiction. You're criminalizing something that is more of a mental health issue. So there's a lot that can be done. And then the other thing we need to do is we've criminalized adolescence in this country. It's tough to be a boy nowadays. You know, boys, especially in communities, in poor communities and urban communities, you know, we introduced school district police officers back in the 80s, maybe 90s. We didn't used to have cops in the school environment. There was no school police. And I'm convinced that over the years, what's happened is we increased the number of police officers in schools. Police officers have taken the place of counselors, of psychologists, of principals, and of teachers. We're in too many communities of color, adolescent behavior. Richard Quintero, I've known that kid since I was in kindergarten. In my freshman year in high school, we were in a science class. He said something about my mother. What do you think happens when you tell a 14-year-old Cuban kid, you badmouth their mother? He got pumped up. I popped them in the mouth. Well, that same punch today, guess what would happen? In too many places in urban America, that same punch gets kids into the criminal justice system. That adolescent reaction gets you in the criminal justice system. So we've got to work on ensuring that police officers in the school environment are there only for safety and nothing else, not to take the place of the administrators, the counselors, the teachers, the psychologists. Then the last thing we have to do, I believe, because it's going to take us 2 to 3 generations to get over these disparities, is we've got to invest in pre-K education, quality pre-K, universal pre-K education for children. What happens to communities of color and poor communities, including white communities, is that today's kindergarten, Pastor, is not the kindergarten. I don't know how old you are, but you're probably younger than I am, but I'm 55. And when I started kindergarten in 1969, it was a 3-hour day. We had nap time, playground time, milk and cookies, and they taught us our colors and a couple of maybe how to count. Today's kindergarten is when my son Jake, who's 12 today, went to kindergarten. The day started at 7:35 in the morning, went to 2:35 in the afternoon. They were reading, writing, doing math, doing science, doing everything that you and I didn't even start touching until the third grade. Luckily for him, his parents were able to get him a quality pre-K education. But the parents of the have-nots, or the children of the have-nots, that through no fault of their own, they're born into circumstances where the economics, they're at home with grandma or grandpa, they're not learning, they don't have the vocabulary that they need to have from day one when they're in kindergarten. They start behind on day one, they fall behind every year. Then in the summers, when the haves are going to great camps where their learning continues, or good after school programs, they're just letting, because these are not dumb kids, these are smart kids. But Absolutely. The learning, they forget half the stuff they learned the previous year because the learning did not continue. We have got to invest in education. And if we can, on the drop of a hat, spend a $2 trillion for COVID-19, why aren't we doing that to deal with the socioeconomic disparities in our country, especially for children that start at birth, continue through life, and end up with the disproportionality we see in our prison system.
Chief, I think you're spot on. As we get ready to close today's show, let me just ask you one other question. What, in your conversations with Sheriff Gonzalez, District Attorney Ogg, the mayor, county judge, county officials, what do you see as the solution? Because I hear people, for example, out of the Reform Alliance who are saying, hey, person was arrested, misdemeanor, or even a low-level felony, but they didn't sign up for, and they shouldn't be put in the position where they have to experience a death sentence for the crime that they have committed. And I know that I know you and Sheriff Gonzalez, I know you all talk all the time.
All the time, yep.
His challenge is he has to house them. I mean, city jails, that's a temporary pass-through, but
we don't have
county
them anymore.
jail.
We closed them.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So there you go. So
yeah,
he's right. So he's holding people now.
Yeah.
What do you see as a solution? That's the balance between the risk factors that you named earlier regarding public safety, recidivism, and flight risk, and the public health concern. Is there a balance that we can reach, or are we at the point where we have to just say, hey, the risks are greater than the public health for this part of the population?
Yeah, I think that we need to balance all of those different considerations. Like for the release, when the judge's order was she actually issued her order, and you looked at all the parameters she put in, she never really talked to me about it, but it included individual assessment. It included nonviolent offenses. It included making sure that we're not releasing somebody that already is exposed to COVID-19. So it included a lot of good safeguards. And so I think if we all put our cards on the table, we're transparent, everyone gives. I mean, think about it. When you were a kid, would you ever thought that cops would say, yeah, man, we should do marijuana diversion? No, we shouldn't arrest that person. Let's take them to mental health. When you were a kid and growing up in New York, and I can imagine when your dad was a cop, it was probably being a person of color early on in this profession. We were late to come on, but as it relates to the rest of society, law enforcement is ahead when it comes to race relations and admitting our own biases, teaching our people, training our people. I think that we have to all come together. We have to be transparent. And quite frankly, the number one thing we can do is bring transparency to the courts. Because if judges know that they're being watched and they're being scrutinized, they're going to be more thoughtful. They're going to be focusing on putting the just in justice, which means that we are smart on our decisions, measured in our decisions, and balancing all of those at sometimes competing interests. But at the end of the day, it should all be the same interest, and we should act in a way that actually brings safety to the greater good, restoration that those that are worthy of restoration and are showing that they can follow restoration, and I think we'll end up with a better society.
Chief Art Acevedo, thank you so much, man. I appreciate you, brother. I appreciate the job that you do. It's not an easy job, but as I said earlier, I never have to question your heart. I may agree or disagree, but man, I know you have your heart in the right place. Have enjoyed our time together. Really had a great time with Class 240 when you all came to the church. Man, I don't know if you're going to have another graduation like that in a while because of social distancing. But, man, it was really, really great. And we certainly will be praying for you and your entire staff that God will continue to bless you and will keep you. Thank you, man.
Thank you, Pastor. Happy Easter.
All right, you too. You've been listening to Real World, Real Talk. I'm your host, Dr. DZ Cofield. And, the late Vernon John said, if you see a good fight, get in it. I always add, if you don't see a good fight, start one. And the fight for our society and our community is a fight that you want to get involved with, but on a personal level, the fight for your mental well-being, your spiritual well-being as well. And if you don't get anything else out of this Christmas season, get out of it the power of resurrection. The power of resurrection. The Word of God says the same power that raised Jesus is the power that can raise you. And so no matter how low you are right now, realize you can be raised as well. And so we hope and pray that you will access that power to fulfill your potential in God. Till next time, Real World, Real Talk. This is Dr. BZ Cofield signing off. You're listening to your member-supported public radio station, KTSU 90.9 on the FM dial. Bye-bye.